My son yelled at me for being late to pick up his kid. I was bleeding from a car accident. I shut him up. It wasn't the bleeding knee or the frozen air that hurt most. It was my son's voice when I walked in the door. That morning had started just like any other. I brewed my usual cup of chamomile tea and wrapped Ethan's scarf in the way he hated, but always kept him warm. I even tucked a chocolate chip cookie in my coat pocket for him, just in case he had a hard day. I remember tipping $2 at my usual cafe stop, the one where the radio always played too low to hear clearly. But that day, I caught the forecast. Light snow. Tonight in Kane County, temps dropping to 15 degrees. I should have taken it more seriously. Should have stayed home, but I didn't by 2:30. The sidewalks around Maple Falls Elementary were slick with black ice. I rushed anyway, worn boots, bad knee and all. The moment I hit the patch near the flagpole, I went down. A quick sting, then a deep burn in my leg. I gritted my teeth and pulled myself up before anyone could notice. My pants were torn at the knee, blood seeping through, but Ethan was waiting. He always expected me. He barely looked up when I called his name, just tossed his backpack at me and walked ahead like a little boss. I limped behind, the cold slicing through my coat, my scarf too loose. He didn't ask why I was walking slower than usual. At home, I barely had time to shut the door behind me before Matthew's voice cut through the living room like a whip. "You're 10 minutes late." He was standing outside like an orphan. I blinked. That's not okay, Mom," he snapped, tugging his AirPods out like I'd interrupted something sacred. "You have one job." Ethan dropped his shoes at the door and stomped off, yelling something about a dead iPad. Melissa emerged from the hallway, expression tight, not even glancing at my face. "Is dinner going to be ready soon?" I told Ethan. We'd eat early tonight. My leg pulsed beneath the wet fabric. I opened my mouth, then closed it. There was no point. I walked past them, silent, dripping melted snow, onto the hardwood floor. In the bathroom, I peeled off my pants and washed the wound. The gash was angry and red. The blood had dried in strange patterns, like branches. I dabbed on ointment and wrapped a clean bandage around it. The skin around it throbbed with each heartbeat. Upstairs, laughter echoed from Ethan's room. YouTube videos blaring. Downstairs, the hum of the TV filled the space with noise I couldn't decipher. I stood in the hallway a moment longer, listening, then changed into dry clothes and shuffled to the kitchen. No one had bothered to set the table. I boiled a small pot of soup, just enough for one. No one asked what I was cooking. No one asked why I didn't cook for all. I ladled my dinner into a chipped blue bowl and sat at the far end of the table alone, spoon in one hand, cloth napkin in the other. Melissa sat on the couch, scrolling. Matthew tapped something on his laptop. AirPods back in. I wasn't sure if he was working or just pretending not to see me. The only warmth in the house came from the soup, that in the space heater, humming quietly by the sink. Then I heard it, soft but clear enough. "She's becoming more of a burden every day," Matthew muttered. I didn't know if he meant for Melissa to hear it or not. Maybe he didn't even realize he said it aloud. She didn't respond, just nodded, vaguely, eyes still on her screen. I lowered my spoon, slowly, hands trembling. That word, burden, landed heavier than the fall I'd taken earlier. I finished eating, washed my bowl, and dried it with the towel that had faded sunflowers on it, the one Ethan used to like when he was 3. In the quiet that followed, I sat a long while in the kitchen, rubbing circles into the fabric of my pants. I ran my fingers over the bandage and whispered, I wasn't always this invisible. I made Ethan's favorite blueberry pancakes. He asked if we had Pop-Tarts instead. I flipped the last pancake onto the plate, carefully dusting it with powdered sugar, the way he used to love when he was 5. He didn't even look up from the tablet when I placed it in front of him. Do we have any Pop-Tarts? He asked, eyes glued to the screen. I stood there for a second, spatula still in hand. You used to like my pancakes, he shrugged. Pop-Tarts are faster. Melissa breezed into the kitchen a few minutes later, hair curled, makeup fresh. She glanced at the plate and raised an eyebrow, still doing the whole made-from-scratch thing. You know, you can get pancake batter on Instacart now. Takes like half the time. Honestly, you still shop. Like it's 1985. She laughed a little, not unkindly, just distracted. Her phone buzzed, and she was already halfway to the living room before I could answer. I poured myself a cup of coffee, ignoring the ache in my knee. It hadn't stopped throbbing since Tuesday, but I stood. I've been standing through worse for years. The snow was falling softly outside, coating the yard in a gentle hush. The radio by the window crackled, then picked up Nat King Cole's voice, warm and velvety chestnuts roasting on an open fire. I used to hum along to that song when Carl was alive. He hated Christmas music, but he let me play it anyway. I finished my coffee and decided to head downstairs. Melissa had mentioned the holiday plates yesterday. They were somewhere in the basement. I was sure of it. Maybe digging around would warm me up a little. The air downstairs was colder, musty, with the scent of cardboard and cedar. I passed old moving boxes, a yellowed baby swing, a cracked vase. I kept meaning to glue. The holiday plates were tucked behind a stack of tins. I reached for them, and that's when I saw it. The corner of a tin box, pale green, with faded pink roses. My heart paused. The recipe box. I hadn't opened it in years. The latch creaked as I lifted the lid. Dozens of index cards sat there, worn with time. My handwriting, my mother's even a few, in Carl's blocky script. My fingers brushed over the familiar titles. Apple crumble, baked, mac and cheese, the strawberry jam cake. Ethan never liked, but I made every Christmas anyway. Then I found it. A yellowing note tucked behind a recipe for lemon bars. The ink was faint, but I didn't need to read it. I knew every word. Thanks for keeping me alive, Carl. It was written after his first heart surgery, when I'd stayed up for weeks straight, cooking bland, boring meals for him, measuring his sodium, hiding the salt shaker, nagging him to take his meds. He called me a nag. Then, one night, he slipped that note into the recipe box. Said nothing, just let me find it. He never said those words out loud. I pressed the paper between my hands. It was soft, from age, almost fragile, like something sacred. I sat down on the basement step, the tin in my lap, and wept quietly. The kind of crying that doesn't shake your shoulders or echo through a house, just salt and memory later. I carried the tin upstairs and stepped out onto the porch. The snow had slowed, leaving a fresh, white sheet over Maple Falls. I sat on the bench box, still in my lap, and let the cold numb my hands. Morning, Helen, a voice called. Nancy stood at the edge of her walk, clutching a mason jar, wrapped in a dish towel. Thought you might want some peach preserves, she said. Made them last week. I wiped my face quickly and smiled. That's sweet of you. She stepped up, eyeing the box on my lap. That, your old recipe box. I nodded. Just feeling the cold today. I lied. Nancy didn't push. She just sat beside me for a minute. Jar warm between us. The door creaked open behind me. Helen, Melissa called. Can you pick Ethan up early on Monday? I've got a nail appointment. At 4. I didn't turn, just nodded barely. After a moment, I opened the lid again and found the note. I folded it slowly, deliberately, and whispered. Even Carl noticed once. They never do. Nancy stood, pulling her scarf tighter. She took a few steps, then turned back. You know, you can talk to me anytime. It wasn't the shirt. It was the way he yelled, like I was nobody. The house buzzed with noise. That morning, pots, clattering drawers, slamming Ethan's screeching cartoons, still playing upstairs. Even though he was supposed to be getting dressed, the sky outside was pale and cold, the kind of white-blue that always made my joints ache. The annual tree lighting ceremony was at 4. Ethan's class was singing Jingle Bell Rock. He was excited, or had been, until the moment I made a mistake. I had forgotten to iron his choir shirt. It had always been ready before, folded, hung, pressed to perfection. But this morning, somewhere between the cinnamon rolls and Melissa's non-fat latte request, it slipped my mind. Just one small thing, Matthew's voice exploded from the hallway. Where's the damn shirt? I flinched. My hands were wrist-deep in a bowl of batter. It's in the laundry room. I meant to. You meant to. His footsteps pounded toward me, fast and sharp. Jesus, Mom. You meant to. He held the wrinkled white shirt in one hand, waving it like a flag of war. Ethan stood behind him, pouting, arms crossed. You ruin everything, Ethan said, not yelling, just flat. I froze. Melissa appeared next, arms folded neatly. You said you had it. Helen, I couldn't look at any of them. I walked into the kitchen. My hands were shaking. I turned off the oven. The cinnamon rolls, half-baked. The smell of them, sweet, unfinished, only made me feel more sick. Matthew kept muttering as he left the room. Unbelievable. I leaned against the counter, pressing both palms flat to the cool tile. From across the street, Nancy stood on her porch, pretending to water a plant that had long since frozen. I saw her phone in her other hand. She wasn't trying to hide it. I didn't know whether to feel embarrassed or grateful. I stayed in the kitchen until the shouting faded into doors slamming and Melissa's heels clicking down the hall. The house felt colder than it should have. The heating was fine, but something in the walls, something between us was broken after they left. I climbed the stairs and walked slowly to my room. I opened the closet and pulled down my old Navy suitcase, the one I used when Carl and I drove to the Smoky Mountains in '92. The zipper still stuck on one corner. I packed 2 changes of clothes and a worn photo of Carl and me taken at a 4th of July picnic decades ago. His smile was crooked. My hair was too big. We looked like strangers now. I stood in the hallway and looked around at the family photos that didn't include me, the wall hooks never used for my coat, the silence that had always followed my footsteps. Then I spoke. You want so much from me, but never once asked how I was doing. My voice didn't tremble. It was low, calm, like I was stating a fact. That afternoon, I stood at the back of the park, watching Ethan sing. He missed a few words in the second verse, fidgeted with his sleeves. I saw it, but I didn't comment. I clutched the suitcase, handle tighter. When I returned home, the porch light was on. I climbed the steps slowly, legs sore. The suitcase thumped softly behind me. Then came the knock. Nancy stood at the foot of the porch, wrapped in a thick brown coat, cheeks pink from the cold. She looked up at me, her eyes steady. You don't have to do this alone. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I left a letter, then quietly froze their future. The sun hadn't fully risen when I slipped out of bed. The house was still steeped in that fragile silence, only found before dawn. I moved slowly, careful not to wake anyone. Even the floorboards seemed to cooperate, for once creaking softly beneath my slippers, as if urging me forward. In the kitchen, I lit the small lamp above the sink. The glow barely reached the table. I sat down, folded my hands for a moment, then opened the drawer where I kept stationery that hadn't seen light in years. I didn't list grievances. I didn't vent. I just wrote questions. Did you ever see me? Did it ever matter when I smiled or cried or bled? Did you know I used to dance in the kitchen when no one was home? I didn't sign love, mom. I just signed mom. Upstairs, I could hear the faint hum of Matthew's sound machine. Ocean waves crashing over my worn-out nerves. Melissa's perfume bottle clinked against the vanity. Their world, still moving, without pause, unaware. By 7:15, I had showered, dressed, and pulled on my old wool coat. Outside, frost webbed the windshield of Nancy's Subaru, already warming in the driveway. She'd said she'd be here before sunrise. She was. Before I left, I took a final look around the kitchen. The fridge still dotted with Ethan's spelling tests. The coffee pot already prepared the night before. My doing as always, I folded the letter in thirds, placed it in the center of the table, and weighed it down with a coaster that read, "Home is where your story begins." Then I picked up my recipe box and slipped it into my bag. It felt heavier than usual. Nancy handed me a travel mug as I climbed into the passenger seat. "Cinnamon tea," she said. "Thought you might want something warm." I managed a quiet thank you. The mug warmed my palms, but not yet my chest, at the bank. Mr. Howard greeted me with a kindness I hadn't felt in a long time. "Mrs. Langley," he said, peering at me over his readers. "You always handled everything for Carl, didn't you?" I nodded. Yes. He never liked paperwork. He smiled. The kind you give someone when you remember more than you're saying. I remember. It didn't take long. I explained that I wanted to freeze the joint account. Carl had left me, the one I discovered Matthew had been dipping into the past year. Mr. Howard didn't ask questions, just handed me a pen and a clipboard. When we walked out, the frost had melted from the sidewalks, but I still felt cold. We drove in silence. At a red light, Nancy asked, "You okay?" I nodded. It was all I could give. In my lap, I clutched the recipe box, like it was a life preserver, I whispered. "I hope they read it. But it's not for them, it's for me." Meanwhile, back in the house, the sun was fully up. Matthew burst through the door, coat still on, muttering about needing breakfast before his meeting. He called out once, twice, then louder, "Mom!" No answer. Melissa entered the kitchen, holding her phone. "She's probably folding laundry or something." She stopped. The letter lay untouched on the table. Before she could read it, the phone rang. Matthew grabbed it. His face twisted as he listened. "Wait, what? The account's frozen." His voice dropped. "She froze it." Melissa finally looked at the letter. She read the first line, then the second. Her fingers trembled. She looked up. "She's gone." She actually left. The house was smaller. The heater rattled, but the silence was finally kind. It took a week for my ears to adjust. I didn't realize how loud my old life had been until I woke up in this cottage. No Ethan shouting for cereal. No Matthew pacing during phone calls. No Melissa asking if I'd picked up the wrong brand again. Just the soft tick of a wall clock and the occasional chirp of birds that hadn't flown south yet. Nancy's late sister had left the place almost untouched. A floral quilt on the bed, yellowed curtains that glowed in morning sun. The heater clanked like it was coughing through its final years. But it worked. That was enough. We spent the first few days scrubbing down the kitchen. Nancy sang along to the radio. Old Carpenters. Sometimes Simon and Garfunkel. She said baking would warm the place up. I didn't tell her I'd already planned to. I used to bake to fill time. Now I baked because it brought me back to life. Cinnamon rolls first, then an apple pie with a crust that flaked like memory. The smell drifted out the cracked window. A dog barked down the lane. Nancy peeked in and grinned, cheeks smudged with flour. "You've still got it," she said. By Saturday, we had a folding table and a slot at the weekend farmers market, nestled between a booth selling hand-knitted scarves and another ladling out butternut squash soup. I was nervous. My hands trembled slightly as I laid out the baskets, but the first customer smiled, then came back the next week with friends. One of them was Mr. Hank. He walked with a cane, wore a brown bomber jacket, and a cap that said, "Ooh, veteran." His eyes were clear blue, sharp, with memory. After his first bite of cinnamon roll, he looked at me, tilted his head, and said, "This tastes like 1947. I smiled, not sure if it was a compliment. He came every Saturday after that, always bought 2 rolls, said one was for the road, the other was for his wife, who passed in 2008. "I eat hers, for her now," he said. "She used to make pies, too, but never had the nerve to sell them." I didn't say much in return, just wrapped the rolls carefully and handed them over with a nod. Nancy handled most of the logistics, taking orders on an old tablet she'd unearthed from a drawer. I called it a magic slate, this touchscreen thing. "It's witchcraft," I said, tapping it cautiously. Nancy nearly dropped her coffee, laughing. We kept our rhythm. Mornings were for baking, afternoons for walking. The trail behind the cottage. Maple trees stood bare, but noble, like silent guards. In the evenings, we sat by the window with tea, sometimes saying nothing at all. One evening, I checked the tablet and noticed I had a new voicemail. I expected it to be from the market coordinator, but it was Ethan. His voice was soft, scratchy. "Grandma, I miss you. Mommy says you're busy." I told her, "Your pancakes are better than Pop-Tarts. I don't care if they're burnt. I hope you come home." I didn't cry, but my chest felt like it had been knocked from the inside. Later that night, as Nancy dried the last dish, she said, almost offhandedly, "My son hasn't called in 3 years. Guess we raised them too well, huh?" We both laughed, but the sound faded too quickly. In the quiet, I whispered to myself, I used to make pancakes no one wanted. Now, strangers line up for my bread. Nancy walked in from the other room with something folded in her hand. She sat down, unfolded it, and slid it across the table. "There's a spring fair next month," she said, tapping the flyer. "You ready to go public?" He knocked, like it was still his house. But this time, I didn't answer right away. I stood at the kitchen counter, tying the last ribbon around a breadbasket. Outside the cottage window, spring flags fluttered above booths, and the faint sound of church bells drifted through the morning air. The heater had stopped rattling days ago. Or maybe I'd stopped noticing 3 months ago. I left with 2 changes of clothes. Today, I wore my favorite blouse, the floral one with sleeves that fluttered just a bit in the breeze. I used to save it for Sundays, for when Carl still cared what I wore. He said it was too cheerful. I wore it anyway. Nancy peeked in from the porch, balancing a tray of cinnamon rolls. "You ready?" she asked. Before I could answer, the knock came again, louder this time, familiar. I walked slowly to the door, My hand rested on the knob. I took a breath, then opened it. Matthew stood there, hair unkempt, tie askew, Melissa behind him, pale and tired looking, holding Ethan's hand. Or maybe he was holding hers. His eyes flicked up at me, then down again. "Hi, Mom," Matthew said. We didn't know where else to go. I waited. He shifted. "Ethan, he talks about you all the time. Keeps asking if you'll make pancakes again." Ethan peeked around Melissa's legs. I said, "Sorry." He mumbled, eyes shiny. Melissa said nothing. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. The sun felt warm on my back. "I loved you all," I said slowly. "I still do, but I won't live unloved anymore." No one spoke. Melissa looked away. Matthew nodded more to himself than to me. They turned. Ethan paused, gave a little wave, then climbed into the back seat. I didn't cry. Inside the kitchen smelled like nutmeg and lemon glaze. Nancy placed a slip of paper on the shelf. It was the transcript of the audio clip she'd saved, framed now in simple wood. "Our freedom started there," she said softly. I nodded. "At the fair. People lined up early. Kids ran with cotton candy. Someone played folk guitar near the fountain. We sold out of cinnamon rolls by 10. Just before noon, a woman with streaks of silver in her hair approached the booth. She held a loaf of honey wheat like it was something sacred. "I watched your video," she said. "The one where you spoke at the community center last month. Your strength helped me leave too." I didn't know what to say, so I just placed my hand over hers for a moment. That was enough. Later, as I packed up the baskets, I caught sight of Matthew's car pulling away in the distance. Ethan was in the back seat, his small face pressed to the window. He waved. I waved back. Then I turned to Nancy, who was tucking the last cash envelope into her purse. "Let's bake something new tomorrow," I said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg to be seen. She simply walked away. And for the first time in years, every step felt like hers. Some people spend a lifetime giving thinking. It's the same as being loved. But when love forgets to say thank you, even the warmest heart begins to freeze, like an old quilt once wrapped around a family's winter. She was set aside when spring came, until she remembered her own warmth. So, if this story has touched something quiet in you, maybe it's time to check who you've stopped hearing or who's stopped hearing you. My grandson threw hot water on me. They said, "He's just a kid I left and took the house deed." I made 5 dishes, folded the napkins into fans, and still no one noticed. I hadn't sat down all night. The oven's soft beep pulled me back to the moment. I grabbed the mitts, lifted the roast chicken with practiced ease, and slid the tray onto the cooling rack. My knees ached from standing since sunrise, but I didn't mention it. The house smelled like cinnamon rosemary and a bit of bleach. I'd scrubbed the counters 3 times to make sure they sparkled before anyone arrived. Liam deserved a clean birthday kitchen. Everyone always said that Daniel once promised me I wouldn't have to cook on Liam's birthdays anymore. That was 5 birthdays ago. Now, he was out in the living room, leaning into the couch cushions, with one eye on his phone and the other vaguely pointed at the cake. "Look here, buddy," someone said. "Smile." I could hear the chorus of iPhone clicks through the kitchen door. I adjusted the pudding cups, vanilla, just the way Liam liked them, and placed them beside the pie. The napkins I had folded into little triangles had begun to wilt from the heat of the room, and I lightly fanned them back up again. The table looked festive from where I stood through the narrow crack in the door. Green and red paper plates, plastic forks in a mason jar, and that cheap birthday banner from Walgreens I reused every year. No one had come in to check on me. I didn't mind. Not really. I liked the kitchen. It was my place. Safe. Even if a bit lonely, I stirred the gravy slowly, letting the rhythm calm my hands. They'd started to cramp again, a familiar dull ache that came with too much chopping and not enough rest. Outside, the first flakes of snow drifted past the window, lazy and quiet. Inside, White Christmas played low on the speakers Daniel had installed last fall during one of his rare bursts of domesticity. Sherry's voice rang out too loud and sharp. "Mom, do you have time to whip up that pudding?" Liam asked for it. I replied, with a polite, "Already done," though I doubted she heard me. 10 minutes later, I peeked through the cracked door. Liam was surrounded by wrapping paper and half-eaten cupcakes. He wore his plastic fireman's hat from the dollar store like a crown. Daniel sat behind him, scrolling through something, Reddit maybe, or fantasy football. And when Sherry leaned over to kiss Liam's cheek, Daniel didn't even glance up. There was no chair for me at the table. I noticed it as I adjusted the plates and counted for the 5th time. Daniel, Sherry, Liam, Aunt Jenny, even the neighbor's daughter were squeezed around the table. Every seat was taken. Mine had never been counted. I didn't say anything. I never did. I turned to grab the hot cider pitcher when Liam burst through the kitchen like a spark. He reached past me to the candy bowl. "Not even a thank you?" I asked, gentle but firm. He shrugged, mouthful of marshmallows. "Dad says it's my day." I nodded slowly, though it stung. "Of course, sweetheart." The casserole dish slipped slightly in my hand. I caught it with a sharp breath and set it down with a clatter, which no one noticed. Through the doorway, I saw Daniel lift his head, just long enough to say, "Thanks, Mom," before he turned back to his screen. Not even eye contact. The smell of burnt sugar started to rise from the edge of the pie. I turned off the oven, sighing. Sherry popped her head in. "Do you think you could add whipped cream to the pudding?" Liam said. "It's not the same without it." "Sure," I said. Even though we were out of cream, I'd have to mix the powdered kind and hope he wouldn't notice. Back at the sink, I rubbed my hands under lukewarm water, hoping to ease the tightness in my knuckles. They were red and swollen, the skin around my thumbs beginning to crack. I opened the cabinet beneath the sink to grab ointment and paused. A thin envelope peeked out from behind the pipe, paper yellowed at the edges. I had meant to move it upstairs, but somehow it had stayed there all these years. I closed the cabinet. Later, as the party waned and Liam tore into his final gift, Daniel called Mom. "Take a photo of us." I wiped my hands on a towel and picked up my phone. I framed the shot carefully. Sherry holding Liam's shoulders, Daniel with one arm half around her, all of them smiling. I didn't ask for a photo with them. I never did. Later that night, I scrolled through the photos on my phone and landed on that one. Everyone beaming around the table, the birthday cake mid-slice. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out why it didn't sit right. Then I realized I wasn't in the picture. Of course I wasn't. I was the one who took it. I sat back, the ache in my shoulders deepening. My hands throbbed. I walked slowly into the kitchen, removed my apron, and folded it over the chair that wasn't mine. I pressed my palm to my side, where a new pain had started. I stood in the kitchen, quietly slipping off my apron, my arms aching from the day's labor. Outside, the first flakes of snow had begun to fall. The cocoa was meant for Liam. Somehow, it ended up soaking my chest, and no one asked if I was okay. The kettle had just begun its soft whistle. When Liam burst into the kitchen, like a gust of cold air, I was holding a ceramic mug in one hand and a jar of honey in the other, setting up my afternoon tea, a small moment I usually reserved for myself after a long weekend of cleaning and cooking. Outside, the snow had turned to freezing rain, tapping lightly against the kitchen window. The television in the living room was playing that old, stop-motion Rudolph movie, the one with the reindeer. And the elf, who wanted to be a dentist, Grandma, Liam barked, his lower lip pushed out in a practiced pout. Mom said, "I can't have another cookie." He stood with arms folded, still in his fuzzy pajamas, even though it was almost 3 in the afternoon. I tried to keep my voice calm. "You've already had 2, sweetheart. Your tummy might hurt," he scowled. "I don't care. I want one. Now, I'm making you a cocoa," I said, stirring the warm milk gently. "Why don't you wait for that?" But the moment he saw the full mug, foamy, chocolatey, topped with little marshmallows, something in him snapped. Maybe it was the sugar crash. Maybe it was the entitlement we never dared name. He stomped forward and yanked the mug out of my hand, too fast, too carelessly. His fingers were small. The mug was heavy. It slipped. The scalding liquid hit my chest like a slap. My breath caught as the heat bit into my skin. I stumbled backward, hitting the cabinet hard. The impact sent a dull thud through my back. But it was the burn that made me suck in a sharp, shaking gasp. I looked down. My shirt was soaked, sticking to me, like second skin. The cocoa left a sticky trail down my side, and the mug shattered against the floor, with a sharp crack. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat clenched too tightly around the pain. Liam froze, then his eyes widened, shimmering with the kind of tears that always arrived. Like a siren's call for help, he began to wail. The sound summoned Sherry immediately. She rushed into the kitchen, eyes going straight to her son. "Not me. Oh my God. Liam, what happened?" She knelt beside him, hugging him, as if he were the one who had been hurt. He looked mad," Liam stammered, sniffling. "I just wanted cocoa. I was making it for you," I said, softly, pressing a dish towel to my chest. The damp cloth was cold, which helped a little, but the burn still throbbed beneath the surface. Sherry didn't look at me. She focused entirely on Liam. "You scared him," she snapped. "Mom, you know how sensitive he is." I didn't raise my voice, I said. He pulled, he grabbed the mug, and, "Let's not do this." Daniel's voice came from the living room. I could hear the laptop keys clacking, and when I turned slightly, I saw him still seated on the couch, working. "Come on, Mom. He's 6. Don't make a big deal out of nothing." "Nothing," I echoed. "I mean," he exhaled, "let's not ruin the rest of the day." Okay. That was the moment something broke, not loudly, but quietly, like a plate slipping from your hand and cracking just enough that you can't see the damage until it leaks later. I turned back to the sink and ran a paper towel under cool water. I pressed it carefully against my chest beneath my shirt. The skin felt tight and raw. I didn't dare look at it. I didn't want to know if it was red or blistered or worse. No one asked. Not Sherry, who was now holding Liam like a baby again, cooing and offering another cookie. Not Daniel, whose laptop was more interesting than the fact that his mother had just been burned. And Liam, he had stopped crying the moment he saw Sherry's face soften, as if it had all been rehearsed. Later that evening, after cleaning the kitchen and wiping up the last sticky traces of cocoa from the floor, I sat alone with a lukewarm cup of weak tea. I had steeped the bag too long, but didn't care. I peeled off my shirt carefully, wincing as the fabric tugged at the skin. A faint burn stretched from my collarbone to the bottom of my rib cage, angry red and uneven. It pulsed a painful reminder of something deeper than spilled cocoa. It reminded me of how invisible I had become even in pain. I opened the freezer and pulled out a bag of peas, the kind I kept for emergencies, pressed it gently against the burn, cold, sharp. I closed my eyes and listened to the house settle into evening, the flicker of the TV still playing holiday specials, Daniel's muffled voice on a Zoom call, Sherry laughing at something on her phone. No one knocked on my door. No one asked how I felt. Around 10:30, I heard the house go quiet. Lights dimmed, doors clicked shut. The hum of the fridge became the only sound. I got up, walked to the sink, and knelt down. I opened the bottom cabinet, the one where I kept spare trash bags and cleaning rags, pushed them aside, and reached into the back. There, where I had tucked it years ago, behind the plumbing, was a small plastic folder. Inside, I slid out a thin stack of papers, deed documents, signatures, crisp, notarized, a name printed in bold at the top, Eleanor Ruth Avery, property owner. I stared at those words, as if seeing them for the first time. My name, still mine, still legally bound to something solid, even if no one in this house remembered it. I folded the papers carefully and held them against my chest, just above the burn where it still ached. Outside, the rain had turned back into snow at 2:14 a.m. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of lukewarm milk and a house deed I hadn't looked at in years. The kitchen was dark, except for the small bulb above the stove. I didn't bother with the overhead light. There was something about this hour that demanded quiet, demanded shadows. Outside, the street lamp cast a pale wash of orange across the hardwood floor. Snowflakes drifted in slow spirals beyond the window, barely clinging to the sill before vanishing. I ran my finger along the edge of the folder. Inside, the paper had gone soft at the corners, but the print remained sharp. Eleanor Ruth Avery, property owner. My name alone. I'd kept the deed tucked under the sink for decades, just in case something ever happened to Daniel, so I could act quickly. But I never imagined I'd pull it out because of something he did rather than something done to him. I took a sip of the milk, wrinkling my nose. It was slightly sour. I set it down. My hand slid over the familiar scrawl of my signature near the bottom of the page. I remembered signing it. I remembered sitting across from the notary in that cramped downtown office, still in my blouse from work, heart pounding in my chest, as she stamped and sealed the document. The money had come from my father's estate, modest but enough. Daniel and Sherry were young parents back then, stretched thin. I'd just retired. They were going to stay for a year or two, help save for their own place. That was 14 years ago. I looked around the kitchen, the hand-painted teapot from my trip to Santa Fe, the ceramic backsplash I'd picked after months of collecting sample tiles, the built-in spice rack Daniel called overkill. The fridge still held the magnet with a photo of Liam from preschool, back when he called me Nana Ellie and snuggled against my cardigan sleeves. Everything in this house had my fingerprints on it, but not a single soul here saw it that way. I stood up, stretched my back, and wandered over to the back door. The lock clicked gently as I turned it and stepped out onto the tiny porch. The air was cold and crisp, smelling of wet pine and frozen soil. Across the way, porch light flickering like a blinking eye, stood Howard's house, No. 12. Just as I was about to head back inside, I noticed him on his stoop, holding a watering can in one hand. Couldn't sleep either. He called softly. I shook my head. Just thinking. He chuckled, rubbing his elbow. My arthritis says this. Weather's terrible for sleep, but the violets don't seem to mind. He gestured at the little flower boxes lining his railing. I could barely make out their shape in the dim light. You always take care of them, I said. And they don't talk back. He grinned. We stood quietly for a few seconds, the way only two insomniacs in their 60s can, comfortable in silence, even at an hour when the world pretended to sleep. Howard tilted his head. You all right, Eleanor? I considered lying, but the chill in the air and the weight of the papers in my hand made me honest. I'm thinking about going away for a few days. His expression didn't change, but he nodded slowly, as if he'd expected it. Well, he said after a moment, if you need someone to talk to, or a retired attorney who still remembers his bar number, I'm at number 12. I felt a small tug in my chest. You still remember that case with your pension. You helped me file the appeal, he said. I don't forget kindness. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. Thank you, Howard. Back inside, I moved with care. I didn't turn on the lights. Just enough moonlight filtered through the blinds for me to find my way. In the hallway closet, I reached for the suitcase I'd once used for weekend trips. It still smelled faintly of lavender, dryer sheets. I opened it on the bed, letting the lid fall back with a soft sigh. Sweaters? I packed two. One was pale blue, the other oatmeal with frayed cuffs. I folded in my wedding photo. Not the one framed on the mantel, but the old one I kept in the back of my recipe book, where our smiles were still untested. I added my handwritten cookbook, the one with grease-stained pages and margin notes like Daniel's favorite and Sherry hates onions. From the top drawer of my dresser, I took the small velvet pouch that held my father's pocket watch and the key to the fireproof box, just in case. I didn't know where I was going yet. Maybe a hotel by the river, maybe just out of town, somewhere with quiet. I walked back to the kitchen one last time. The milk had gone cold. I folded the deed carefully, placed it back in the folder, and tucked it into the side of the suitcase. Then I zipped the bag and stood still for a moment, listening. I nodded, went back inside, folded the papers, and began gathering the small things I would take with me. I didn't leave a note, just locked the front door, slipped the house deed into my coat pocket, and walked out. The morning air bit at my cheeks as I stepped off the porch. Snow coated the lawn in a soft, untouched layer, so clean it felt wrong to disturb it. The sky was a dull winter gray, the kind that swallowed sound and made every movement feel heavier. I left the keys in an envelope, taped inside the mailbox. No drama, no announcement, just silence. Daniel once joked, if you ever left, who'd make that roast chicken I love. I doubt he remembered saying it, but now there'd be no roast. No one would notice the spices were off, or that the skin wasn't crisp enough. Just silence and leftovers from a plastic container. I opened the Uber app. A driver named Darren accepted ETA 6 minutes. While I waited, I walked next door and knocked gently on Mr. Howard's door. He opened it, wearing a fleece robe, blinking in surprise. Eleanor, everything all right. I'm heading out for a few days, I said simply. Would you mind printing something for me later? I need copies of property rights forms. Oregon law. He studied my face carefully. The way a man looks when he wants to ask a question, but respects the silence more. Of course, he nodded. Number 12's always open. The Uber pulled up just as I turned around. The driver rolled down the window and smiled. He was maybe in his early 30s, with a kind face and coffee in the cup holder. "You heading somewhere peaceful today, ma'am?" he asked. Adjusting the volume on the radio, Frank Sinatra was playing faintly. "I hope so," I said, sliding into the back seat. The roads were still slick with slush, but he drove carefully. We passed the familiar bend in the road, where the neighborhood Christmas lights always went up too early. This year, I hadn't noticed them at all. When we pulled up to Lorraine's guest house, it looked exactly the same as I remembered. A little red brick building, tucked between a laundromat, in a diner, with wind chimes dancing faintly in the cold air. I stepped out, paid, and thanked Darren. He smiled and tipped his cap, like we were in a black and white film. "Take care now." Lorraine opened the door before I knocked. She froze, wide-eyed. "Eleanor Avery." "Hi, Lorraine," I said, brushing snow from my shoulders. "My God." She stepped back, letting me in. "I still have that wool scarf you gave me last winter. The green one with the little white stitches. You said it reminded you of your grandmother." I smiled faintly. "I didn't think you'd remember." She waved a hand. "Please, I don't forget people who save my Christmas Eve with a lemon bundt cake when the bakery canceled my order." The lobby was warm and smelled like cinnamon and lemon cleaner. Lorraine led me to a small room upstairs. Room 3A, floral curtains, a modest bed, and a tiny kitchenette tucked into the corner. Everything looked like it had been scrubbed twice over. "You staying long?" "1 week," I said. "Maybe longer." Lorraine nodded, lips pressed gently together. "Whatever you need." When she left, I set my bag on the bed and looked around. The silence here was different. Not empty, just mine. I opened the closet. No clothes waiting to be folded, no jackets crammed to one side, just one wooden hanger and a shelf. I hung up my coat, then sat on the bed. The mattress creaked, not in protest, but like it was introducing itself. I ran my hand over the blanket, cotton, warm, neatly tucked. On the nightstand sat a small vase with one dried daisy. Inside Lorraine's touch. Later she knocked with a tray. 2 slices of toast with strawberry jam, and a cup of drip coffee. "No frills, no questions, breakfast," she said, placing it on the table. "You always said the toast matters more than the butter." I hadn't remembered saying that, but maybe I had. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Eleanor, you're one of the kindest women I've ever met on this street. You've helped people quietly when no one was watching. It's your turn to be taken care of. Now." The words hit something soft in me. I nodded. She didn't wait for a response, just closed the door gently behind her. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat in the chair by the window, watching the snow settle under the street lamps. Then I opened my coat pocket and pulled out the deed. The paper made a soft whisper as I unfolded it. My name, my address, my signature. I ran my fingers along the creases, smoothed the edges, and I whispered more to myself than anyone. I still have something that belongs to me. "Would you like to make this permanent?" the notary asked, pen hovering. I nodded before she finished. The pen felt heavier than it should have, though. Maybe that was just the weight of everything behind it. The notary was a short, silver-haired woman named Janet, with thick glasses and a firm but kind expression. Her office smelled faintly of peppermint and old paper. A small space heater buzzed softly at her feet, warming the air with its metallic breath. I sat across from her in a straight-backed chair, my coat still buttoned. Rain tapped steadily against the window behind her desk. Outside, the sky was a wash of gray, the kind that settles into your bones. Lorraine sat nearby, flipping through a pamphlet about retirement planning without really reading it. She was just here for moral support. She hadn't said much, but I could feel her presence, like a hand resting lightly on my back. I looked down at the papers again. The transfer form, the declaration of intent, the notarized amendment. All of it, directing ownership of my home, to a nonprofit that helped displaced women over 60. The paperwork would only take effect after my passing. Until then, I could still technically walk back in. But in truth, I knew I never would. I signed with a steady hand. "There we go," Janet said gently. "That's everything." Lorraine squeezed my arm as I stood. We thanked the notary and stepped out into the mist. My shoes crunched softly on the damp sidewalk, the smell of wet asphalt thick in the air. Across the street was a little diner I hadn't been to in years. Millie's, a place where Daniel used to take me for pie on Mother's Day, back when Liam was still in diapers. And Sherry smiled. Without calculation, I walked in alone. The hostess, a girl who couldn't have been more than 20, offered a window booth. I slid into the vinyl seat and ordered the chicken pot pie and a coffee. "Anything else?" she asked. "No," I said. "That's enough." The jukebox in the corner crackled to life with unchained melody. I hadn't heard it in years. Roy Orbison's voice filled the space with a gentle ache, like someone brushing dust off a photo frame. I used to dance to this song barefoot in the kitchen, long before Daniel could walk, before everything needed to be scheduled and practical and explained. The pie arrived, flaky, golden, filled with steaming chicken and vegetables. I cut into it slowly. I ate slowly. No one interrupted. No one asked what was for dinner tomorrow. No one needed me to clean up anything. When the bill came, I placed 3 $1 bills on the table. The same tip I'd always left, even when Daniel used to tease Mom. "You're not Oprah. Why are you tipping like that?" Because someone once taught me, kindness shouldn't depend on how much you think the other person makes. And besides, I'd never missed that extra dollar, but now I left it with a quiet sense of defiance. Not out of spite, out of principle. Lorraine met me at the door as I stepped back out. She studied my face for a long moment. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. I looked up at the rain streaking across the glass awning, at the way the world outside had blurred into watercolor. "Only that I didn't do it sooner," I said. We stood there for a while, watching cars roll by. I could feel something unspooling inside me. Not pain, just release, like someone had wiped years of fingerprints off the glass of my memory. Back at the guest house, I kicked off my shoes and settled onto the bed. Letting my coat slide off my shoulders, I placed the final copy of the deed in the nightstand drawer. It was no longer a symbol of where I lived, but of what I'd chosen. I'd made the decision on my own terms, not as someone's mother, someone's cook, someone's forgotten backbone. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a message from Daniel Mom. "What is this? Are you serious?" I stared at it for a few seconds, then gently turned the phone over, screen down on the nightstand. I didn't respond. The silence said enough. New Year's Eve. And for once, no one told me what to wear, what to cook, or when to smile. The stars were out in full scattering across the Oregon sky, like sequins on black velvet. The wind was gentle, almost ceremonial, as if the universe had agreed to hold its breath while the year turned its last page. Inside Lorraine's living room, the table had been pushed aside to make room for extra chairs. A soft hum of laughter and gentle conversation filled the space, floating around the scent of spiced cider and fresh-baked rolls. The local TV station played low in the background, counting down the final hours with grainy footage of fireworks in Portland. I'd brought a warm apple pie, still steaming, golden edges, crimped the way my grandmother used to do it. No one asked me to bake. I just wanted to. For the first time in years, cooking didn't feel like service. It felt like offering. Lorraine ushered me toward the dining table and pulled out the chair at the head. "You're sitting here tonight," she said, smiling with no trace of insistence, just sincerity. I couldn't. I murmured, instinct tightening in my throat. She raised an eyebrow. "You can, and you will." So I did. Iris and Mabel, 2 women from Lorraine's quilting circle, had come early and helped string lights along the bookshelf. Mr. Howard stopped by briefly with a bottle of root beer and a tin of peanut brittle. "Didn't want to overstay," he said, tipping his hat, but figured a toast with friends never hurt. We clinked mugs and shared soft, tired smiles, the kind that come from surviving decades and still managing to show up with dessert. After dinner, we moved into the living room, each holding a small glass of apple wine. Someone turned down the lights and the TV flickered with images of people dancing in coats and scarves downtown. Mabel looked at me suddenly and asked, "Do you ever regret it?" I didn't hesitate, only that I lived so small for so long. Lorraine reached over and squeezed my hand. When the countdown reached 10, we joined in softly, not shouting, like in the years when children screeched and sparklers snapped in our hands, but with a rhythm that matched our years, steady. Intimate 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. We chimed in, and Mabel leaned across to hug me. Her cheek was soft with age, warm with closeness. I raised my glass. The room quieted. Even the flicker of the television seemed to pause. Here's to women who left quietly and never came back the same. The others raised theirs in turn, murmuring soft affirmations. Later that night, when the last slice of pie had been eaten and the last laugh had faded into comfortable silence, I walked into the guest room Lorraine had prepared for me months ago. There was a new calendar on the wall, its first page crisp and bright. Beneath the photo of a sunlit meadow in cursive script were the words, "You are your own home." I smiled, fingers brushing the corner of the page. I sat at the vanity and pulled out my phone. The screen reflected my face, lines deepening silver streaks in my hair and eyes. I finally recognized as mine. Without overthinking, I lifted the phone and took a photo, my first real selfie. No filter, just me. Then I typed the caption slowly, letting the words come, like breath, starting over at 67. This time for me. The night was quiet, and for the first time in years, so was my heart. I had once believed that love meant always giving, always staying, until I learned that when you forget to value yourself, even the people you've given everything to can learn to forget you too. Kindness is a gift, yes, but dignity is a boundary. Like an old quilt that once kept everyone warm, we must remember it deserves a place even when the room no longer feels cold. If this story stirred something in you, perhaps tonight is the right time to reach for your own warmth and protect it gently but firmly.